He was a kind man, a physicist with a warm smile and pleasant demeanor. His organizational skill was respected by the whole congregation. Indeed, most of the people who belonged to this small Unitarian Universalist fellowship were there because of him. He told me he was going to court, and he told me why. He had inappropriately touched a 10-year-old girl entrusted to his care. He was guilty, but he was not going to make any public statement before he could plea bargain. I asked him to stay away from the congregation until the case was settled. Initially, he agreed. That Sunday, we held a meeting with all the members of the church and the parents. We had a policy from the beginning, the formation of this church, of having 2 adults present whenever there were activities with our children. We reviewed the records. The only times he had been teaching in RE, other adults had been with him. He had not the opportunity to harm our children. Many in the congregation could not believe the charges were true. Because of pastoral confidentiality, I could not reveal what I knew. Some insisted that he be allowed to attend services since he was innocent until proven guilty. I urged that we err on the side of caution, for if he had been innocent, the worst that would have happened was that a 55-year-old man would have missed church for about 6 months. But being a pedophile, the risk of him being in the congregation was too great of a risk to take. There was a split in the congregation. In general, the parents of young children did not want him to ever return. The older adults who did not have children in the home tended to argue for the inherent worth and dignity of the perpetrator. People quit the board and the church over this issue. He knew he was guilty, but he never told his supporters, allowing them to fight for his innocence and disrupt a congregation that was only 2 years old. During this time, in a congregation of about 60 people, at least 6 revealed to me that they had been abused as children. The board and I were more concerned about their inherent worth and dignity. The man decided to return to his former congregation. It was larger, and he had many old friends, and they had the staff and the wherewithal that they could develop a program where he was shepherded in and out of church activities by adults who never left his side. This shepherding program was overseen by a PhD psychologist who organized a team of people to watch him and giving him the freedom to attend a church. But he tried to manipulate her into loosening the restriction, but she would not bend to his charisma, which was much. He was a very charming and likable man. And so he eventually stopped attending any church. And finally his case was adjudicated and he was sentenced to 3 years in jail. He was unrepentant. He told me that the girl had been more traumatized by the legal system than anything that he had done. This is the nature of sex abuse in churches. Perpetrators are often well-liked, even beloved, often honored for being so willing to work with our children. When accusations come forward, people do not want to believe that it is true. This could not happen in a UU church, could it? Haven't we evolved beyond repressed sexuality? The press has made much speculation in recent months about the Catholic Church and how celibacy may cause priests to bottle up their sexuality only to have it escape in aberrant ways. In Unitarian Universalism, we are so positive about the variety of sexual expressions that sometimes we have the opposite problem of recognizing clear boundaries. But the boundaries are clear. We celebrate sexuality between consenting adults. If it isn't consensual, or one of the parties is not an adult, then a line has been crossed. Anyone who has taught our whole lives curriculum or had a conversation with our teens cannot deny that they are full of sexual desires. They are sexual beings. But if they came over to your house, took off their clothes, and said they wanted to have sex with you, we as the adults are obligated to say no. Tell them to put on their clothes. It is always the adult's role to set boundaries. A 17-year-old may look like an adult in many ways, but is still a child. Consent is a more complex issue. Ideally, it means two people of equal power making an agreement. Thus, it is possible for sex to be abusive even if it is technically legal. A 40-year-old chaperone should not have sex with a youth who is 18 and officially an adult. The power imbalance is such that consensual relations are not possible. There have been congregations that have participated in keeping an affair secret. The two lovers may have been consenting adults, but I doubt that they got the consent of their spouses. This type of secret keeping is harmful to the fabric of community and unfair to the spouses that are kept in the dark. The relationship between a minister and a congregation is a delicate matter. Even a single minister dating a single parishioner is problematic. We like to believe that our church structure is more egalitarian than other denominations, and perhaps that may be. Our ministers are not, and very seldom, put on pedestals. Ministers are seldom perceived as holier than thou. Nevertheless, there still exists the power differential. Other parishioners can quickly feel that the minister's lover is getting special treatment in the boardroom as well as the bedroom. If the couple breaks up, who gets the church? Then also, if the parishioner has come initially to the minister in a counseling situation, then all the prohibitions and consensual relationship rules that any counselor has about having a relationship with their counselee apply. At a recent meeting that I attended of UU ministers, a woman who was planning to be a UU minister and who was single was courageous enough to ask, "How will being a minister affect my sex life?" The short answer was that a single minister can have a sex life as long as it's in a town 50 miles away. We UUs like to believe that we are immune to sex abuse in our congregations. But it has happened, and it can happen here. Any institution where adults work with children must be vigilant in preventing child sex abuse. Any institution where there are staff and volunteers of different status, there is a potential for sexual harassment. The first step in prevention is the elimination of denial. Once we recognize that sexual abuse can and does happen in UU congregations, we can take steps to prevent it. Several years ago, our denomination developed a curriculum called Safe Congregations. I have a copy of it here. It could be a way for us to prepare for a possible incident. Besides just reacting to sex abuse, the curriculum works to help a congregation build a community of right relations. Sex abuse is a continuum. Child rape is on the most intense end of that continuum. But we must also be attuned to the lower end of the continuum. Dirty jokes, innuendo, unwanted hugs can make people feel uncomfortable. And we must always strive to put one another at ease. Be mindful that the person you are interacting with may be a survivor of child sexual abuse. Ask before you offer a hug, and respect a person's right to say no. Be careful about the offhand comment. In recent weeks, I have heard supposed jokes about Catholic priests that make light of the pain that victims feel. Humor is a very delicate thing. In some ways, it can be a way of dealing with topics that we are uncomfortable with. That is why many jokes are about sex or about ethnic groups. You seldom have jokes about the kitchen, which we're all very comfortable with. These issues are often difficult to talk about. And when done well, humor can be a way to relieve tension and allow further conversation. But when done poorly, jokes can perpetuate sexism, racism, and homophobia. I'm not suggesting that we stop all attempts at humor. I think that would be impossible for me. But when we run into a person who can't take the joke, we need to pause and change strategy. There may be very valid reasons that that person is unable to get the joke. And we should listen to those reasons and support people in their healing. Violence is also a continuum, with murder being its highest form. But it's best that we intervene at a lower point in the continuum. Name-calling is the first step in dehumanizing your opponent. Even viewing people who disagree with you as opponents set the stage for escalation. You need to seek ways to be united around common goals and be attentive to small abuses, and we can prevent some larger issues. We do, as UUs, have an ethic of toleration, but all too often we allow that ethic to tolerate abusive behavior in the name of that's just that person being himself or herself. As a loving community, we need to find ways to call people accountable of their behaviors while reinforcing that we still love them. We can say, I hear your anger when you express that, but I'm unable to respond to the actual issue because I need to hear it again in a different way. We need to have the courage to hold each other accountable and create an atmosphere of open communication. Because it's better to stir up small waves than to be surprised by a tidal wave. And whenever children are involved, we must insist on 2 adult supervisors. Now, it may seem ridiculous to have 2 child care providers in a situation where there's only 1 child. But it is precisely the one-on-one child-adult interaction that we want to avoid. At the mountain camp, teens are not allowed to walk around alone or in couples. By insisting on groups of 3, it lessens the likelihood of teen suicide and sexual activity. The policy is arbitrary and not foolproof, but it is a way to lower the potential for harm. As a people, UUs are resistant to rules. Attempts to modify our speech and behavior can often be perceived as intrusive or merely being politically correct. But if we are able to tolerate nitpicking, we can prevent an infestation. Ideally, it would be best to live in a community where there is no need to lock our doors. But locking our doors is a sacrifice we are willing to make, and it lessens the incidence of stealing. It doesn't prevent stealing. My father, a small business owner, often was cynical and said, we need to lock the doors because it keeps out the honest people. The people who want to steal will find a way. It would be best to live in a world where no one is sexually abused. But we must recognize that in our congregation, if we are in any way a statistical sample of the society at large, there are perpetrators here, and there are victims here, and survivors. Survivors of abuse who do not deal with their experience are the most likely to repeat the pattern of abuse. We do not know specifically who is at most risk in this room, but we can provide an atmosphere where opportunities for abuse are minimized. As a denomination, we have taken some important steps. Recently, in an open letter to Unitarian Universalists, President William Sinkford writes, "Pedophilia is not restricted to the Catholic clergy. Though the examples are few, it has been present in our own midst as well. Unitarian Universalism has dealt with these few cases honestly, directly, and promptly. We train our clergy to understand and to be sensitive to issues of sexual abuse and misconduct. We have good resources in creating safe congregations. Our whole lives, our comprehensive sexuality curricula educates people of all ages from age 5 through adults to be aware of the dangers of sexual abuse, to speak out in defense of their own selves, and to help people find a positive relationship to their own sexuality. We have been serious and I believe effective in addressing this issue, but we cannot be triumphant. Our public witness is necessary here, but it's not sufficient. We minister in a world where trust has been betrayed, where authority has failed in its responsibility, where persons have been stripped of their faith. Our commitment to safety in our congregations. May nothing evil cross this door. But our ministry must also know the depth of the anguish that is already within our walls. And our promise to one another must be to make space for that anguish and to be present and search for paths that lead to restoration. The Safe Congregation panel of the UUA offers the following mission statement. We covenant together to honor ourselves, our task, and each other, being fully and presently prepared, spiritually, emotionally, physically, and intellectually, listening compassionately for and sharing generously of the wisdom and experience we bring, maintaining confidentiality while not perpetuating secrecy, holding each other accountable to our individual convictions and our shared Unitarian Universalist principles, and to welcome the cloud of witnesses who sit with us, listening especially for the voices of victims and survivors. We join our hearts and minds and hands to this continuing work with recognition of the magnitude of speaking truth to power, transforming hearts, and bringing hope. I ask this congregation to embrace this covenant. We must be fully present to each other. This requires us to look for things we would rather not see. We need to listen compassionately to one another and to seek understanding of victims and perpetrators. It is a difficult task to balance confidentiality with secrecy. I read of one church where members of the church sat on the information for 9 months at the request of the police who had been contacted and were investigating because they didn't want the case to be blown. Can you imagine sitting on a secret like that at the request of the law enforcement, hoping that this is the way that the perpetrator could be caught and stopped? That is a struggle. One way to tell the difference is whether keeping quiet protects the abuser or the abused. Sometimes it's necessary for a congregation to endure the negative publicity in order to deal with the situation forthrightly. At the same time, those who reveal abuse must feel safe from those who wish to deny that abuse is occurring. It is a natural tendency to hate the messenger, to vilify the bearer of bad news. That is why it is appropriate sometimes to protect the identity of the accuser. But when it appears that laws have been broken, it is best to go to the police. We should go to the police. We accomplish nothing by keeping it secret. Going public protects the institution from liability. Often the attempts to cover up makes a bad situation worse. Ours is a relational faith. We are bound to each other not by a common faith, but by common purpose. We strive together to respect one another. We are committed to justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. We aspire to a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And we work towards an understanding of what it means to be interdependent, each with the other and with all that is. We owe it to the survivors, to the perpetrators, to our congregations, to ourselves, and to our faith to stand on the side of accountability for our professional clergy and of all our members, to stand on the side of justice and compassion for all those who are abused. We owe it to the entire community of faith to establish clear and fair processes. Such processes will be based in truth-telling with compassion and mercy, and will assist in restoring right relationships. Committing to restorative justice can demonstrate the healing power of our faith. We have a message of healing brokenness in the world, and surely it begins here. Surely it begins in the basic principles spoken by a prophet years ago: doing justice, loving kindness, and walking humbly with one's God. Current work towards revising the processes for admitting ministers can have a major impact in this area. That is why last week, when I was at a retreat with people who want to be UU ministers, we made certain that we talked about this issue. We need to continue to minister to the survivors and those whose voices have been largely unheard. I conclude with this prayer, written by Pam Kitteridge Peterson. Spirit of life, Touch with love our unseen wounds. Where we have known fear, touch us with trust. Where we have known pain, touch us with healing. Where we have been tethered, set us free to soar. Touch our silence and give us voice. Touch our anger and give us justice. By your handiwork we shall know you. Blessed be. Amen.